This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming. When I sent out the text later this afternoon, that with the late breaking news about the refreshments, so somebody responded right away, okay, now I'm coming. So,
wow, really?
We want to thank Sam Daniels for sponsoring tonight's event and for being mechazik, the limud HaTorah. We bless him with the Birchas HaTorah. Eitz Chaim Hilma Chazikim Ba. The Rebbeinu Shalom should bless him and his whole family with good health, parnas v'revach, v'imali Hashem kol mishalosav l'toiva. Okay. The Yom Tov of Pesach is coming. We're well within Shloshim Yom Kodem HaChag. Already Shabbos, God willing, will be Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And of course, one of the primary mitzvahs of the night of the Seder is the mitzvah of matzah. And the Torah tells us in Parshas Boy, Parak Yud Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin, Ushmartem es hamatzos. You got to guard the matzos, right? That's what the text said, right? Guard the matzos. Okay. Why? Why do you have to guard the matzos? Ki be'etzem hayom hazeh, because on this very day, Hashem didn't waste any time. On this very day, Ha'itzeisi es tzivoiseichem me'eretz Mitzrayim, God took out all of His hosts from Egypt. Ushmartem es hayom hazeh l'daroseichem chukas olam. Preserve this day for all generations. Okay, so the pasuk says, guard the matzah. In other words, make sure the matzah does not become chametz. Says Rashi, what are you guarding the matzah from? Shelo yavoi lidei chimotz, so that the matzah does not become chametz. Mikan amru, from here Chazal derive, tipach, if the matzah begins to swell, right, it starts to rise, what do? Tiltoish b'tzayin, you got to rinse it with cold water. That will retard the fermentation process. Okay? That's a simple interpretation of the pasuk. Guard the matzah, make sure it doesn't become chametz. Comes along Rabbi Yoshia, and Rabbi Yoshia tells us the drush. Rabbi Yoshia says, Al tehi koreas hamatzos, don't read the pasuk to mean guard the matzah, but rather, ela es hamitzvos. Guard the mitzvos. Kiderach she'ein machmitzin es hamatzos, just like if you have matzah, you got to do it very hastily. You have to capitalize. You can't let any time elapse. You have to take care of the matzah, make sure that it does not rise. Kach ein machmitzin es hamitzvos. Likewise, do not let a mitzvah ferment. Don't let it rise. Why? Ela and bali yadcha. If a mitzvah comes your way, aseh samiyad, do it immediately. Okay? So the simple interpretation of the pasuk is that when you're taking care of your matzah, guard it that it doesn't become chametz. Says Rabbi Yoshia, we could read this pasuk a different way as well, and that is, it's not referring specifically to matzah; it's referring to all mitzvahs. When you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, capitalize. Don't let any time elapse. Don't let the mitzvah turn chametz. Do it right away. Okay. So tonight, this evening, in honor of Pesach, we're going to have the Arba Kashas. We're going to have 4 questions, okay? And that will bring us into the second half of the segment of the share. We're going to ask 4 questions. Question number 1. According to the drush of Rabbi Yoshia, what's the pasuk saying? When a mitzvah comes your way, let's say like this. You're at home, you're visiting your family, and your father says, do me a favor, get me a glass of water. So, if you're a little bit lazy, you'll say, okay, just in a few minutes, I want to just look at this, I want to take care of that, I want to do this. But by the time you get around to doing the mitzvah, who knows? You'll get a phone call, you'll have to leave, you'll forget about it, you may lose the mitzvah. So the Torah is saying, Ushmartem es ha-mitzvos, guard the mitzvah, do it right away. Ask the Ksav Sofer, how do you read the second part of the pasuk? What's the pasuk saying? You know why you should do mitzvahs right away? Because God took you out on that day from Mitzrayim. What's that got to do with doing mitzvahs right away? What, if Hashem would have taken us out a different day, then we could be lazy about mitzvahs and we wouldn't have to do it right away? I mean, what is the fact that God took us out of Mitzrayim on that day, what does that got to do with doing a mitzvah immediately? And if Hashem took us out a different day or a different time, then we would be allowed to do a mitzvah later? I mean, what is one thing, right? Mashmita Eitzel Har Sinai. What are apples and oranges? What does one thing got to do with the next? You do a mitzvah right away because you might lose the opportunity. What does it have to do with the fact that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim on that day? Okay. Question number 2. We are going to look at a few lines from perhaps what is considered the greatest Musar and Hashkafa work ever written. The Mesilas Yesharim, right? Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, Kol Sifrei Musar Kodesh, all works of Musar are holy. Mesilas Yesharim, Kodesh Kadashim, the Holy of Holies. In fact, the Vilna Gaon, he is reputed to have said that he read the first 11 chapters of Mesilas Yesharim, and he did not even see one extra word. Okay, so for the Vilna Gaon, who went through things with a fine-tooth comb, for him to say there's not one extra word, we know every word is written with great precision. By the way, the Vilna Gaon also said, was reputed to have said, that if he had the opportunity to learn from the Ramchal, he would have walked 50 kilometers barefoot to hear words of Musar from the Ramchal. Now, just think about that. The Vilna Gaon, it's not like he had extra time on his hands to listen to Musar Shmuzin. Right? We know there's a story later on in his life, his sister came to visit him, and after a few moments, the Vilna Gaon said, look at my beard, it's already white. That means God is summoning. I don't have that much time, and he wished her well. So the Vilna Gaon did not have a lot of free time to hear Musar Shmuzin. And yet, the Vilna Gaon, who, by the way, learnt in his home during the day with the shutters closed, so he would not be disturbed for even a few moments, he said he would take the time out to walk barefoot to hear words of Musar from the Ramchal. Okay, so we're going to analyze one line of the Mesilas Yesharim and ask a very strong question on it. Take a look. This comes from Parak Zayin of the Mesilas Yesharim, where the Mesilas Yesharim describes for us the midah of zrizos. Zrizos is alacrity, to do mitzvos with zeal, with energy. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, Chelkei hazrizos shnayim. There are two parts of zrizos. Echad kodem haschalas ha'maisa, one before the mitzvah begins. The echad achrei chen, and one after the mitzvah begins. Okay. What does it mean, zrizos, before the maisa begins? Says the Mesilas Yesharim, kodem haschalas ha'maisahu, before the act. Shelo yachmitz ha'adam es ha'mitzvah. Don't let the mitzvah grow stale. Ela b'hagia zamana, when the time comes to do a mitzvah. For instance, you wake up Shabbos morning, you wake up 8 o'clock, and you look at the Zmanim, and you see Zman Kriya Shema is in 50 minutes. And if you wait to say it when you're in shul, they're going to say it after the Zman. So when should you say the Shema? Should you say it now, or maybe you should say, I have 50 minutes, I'll wait 40 minutes to say the Shema. So Mesilas Yesharim tells us, as soon as the time comes to do the mitzvah, you woke up in the morning, do it immediately. Do it now. Or when the thought enters your mind. Once in a while you have a thought, you want to do a mitzvah. You have a thought, you need to call somebody to wish them a good Shabbos, wish them a good Yom Tif, and the thought enters your mind to do it. So when are you going to do it? If you're going to say, I'll do it in a few minutes, who knows? By the time you get around to it, someone else will call, you'll get busy, you'll get distracted, you'll forget about it. As soon as the thought enters your mind, do it right away. Okay? Yemaher yachish ma'aseyu, you should quickly, hastily do the maisa, do the act, lechozva, to grab a hold of it, v'lasos asa, and to perform it, v'lo yaniach zman lizman sheyisrabe beintayim. Do not let time elapse. Okay, and here are the key 4 words. You ready? Ki ein sakana kisakanasai. There is no greater danger in the world. Says the Mesilas Yesharim. Because if you're going to let time elapse, every moment that elapses, a new distraction could arise. Right? If you wait 1 minute, 60 distractions could emerge. If you wait 2 minutes, right, every additional second you wait, new things could come up to interfere with the mitzvah. And therefore, says the Matzos Sharm, when one has the opportunity to do a mitzvah, ein sakana kisakanasai, there is no greater danger in the world. I'll ask you a question. There's no greater danger in the world? What do you mean? What about if you have the opportunity to do an Aveira? You're talking to someone, and you have a real good, juicy piece of Lashon Hara to say. Should you say it? Should you not say it? You want to say it. It'll make you feel good to really, rip this guy. But no, it's wrong. You're struggling with yourself. Should you say it? Should you not say it? I would say, ein sakana kasakanasa. There's no greater danger. Or you have the opportunity, you're passing by McDonald's, you're starving, and should I go in, should I not go in? Yes, no, yes, no. Ein sakana kesakanose. There's no greater danger. But yet the Matzos Yesharim doesn't give this description, these words. The Matzos Yesharim doesn't say that when one is faced with the challenge of an Avera, Ein sakana kesakanose, there's no greater danger. The Matzos Yesharim doesn't say that. The Matzos Yesharim says when you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, that is the greatest danger in the world. Why is that the greatest danger? Isn't it equally as great of a danger if one is faced with the opportunity to do an Avera? By the way, I remember hearing this question from Harav Avigdor Miller, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha. Actually, he said this on a tape after he finished 1,000 Shiurim, Thursday night Shiurim. He started a new series called the E-Series. This is from tape E1. This is tape E1. That means 1,001. E, I think, stands for LF. 1,001. This was Rav Miller's question on the Matzos Yesharim. A very strong question, right? If we're dealing with, a different type of sefer, maybe we wouldn't be able to be so medactic and so precise and ask, why did he select this word usage? But we're dealing with the Matzos Yesharim. Why did the Matzos Yesharim select this word usage on the opportunity to do a mitzvah? Okay. Parshas Vayikra this week, so we can't neglect Parshas Vayikra. And in this week's Parsha, it talks about many different types of sins. It talks about if the whole community sins. It talks about if an individual sins. What word does the Torah use to describe the situation where the entire community sins? It says, Im kol ha'eda asasa b'shgaga, right? If the whole congregation sins accidentally. Right? Im, the word im, which means if, is the correct usage. If. It's not a foregone conclusion that the whole congregation, the whole community is going to sin. Im, if. What about when we deal with an individual? It says im, nefesh achas. If one individual sins, he has to bring a carbon chatas. And yet when we talk about the Nasi is the leader of the Jewish people, the word the Torah uses is asher Nasi yechta. That the Nasi sins. What do you mean that the Nasi sins? What, the Nasi has to sin? The word asher seems to imply, almost, it's a foregone conclusion that the Nasi will sin, that the king will sin. Why is that true? It's not a foregone conclusion that the whole community will sin. Right? The Torah says, Im kol adas Yisrael. It's not a foregone conclusion that an individual will sin. The Torah says, Im nefesh achas techta. So why use the word asher? Asher implies that he sins, as if it is a foregone conclusion that the Nasi will sin. Okay. That's question number 3. Who are the greatest men who ever lived? What would you say? The greatest one, Moshe Rabbeinu. Like come Moshe, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest man who ever lived. Who else? Abraham. I'll put him right up there, right? He appears on the Kisei on the Merkava. Who else? Who? David HaMelech, he's also on the Merkava. He's number 2. Who else? Reuven was very great. What? Who is the greatest person? Who would you know? Who's the Mount Rushmore of the Jewish people, right? Who are the... Who? Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, David. Their 4 faces appear on God's throne. The Regel Rishon of God's Kisei is Abraham. The Regel Sheni is Yitzchak. Regel Shlishi, Yaakov. Regel Ravi, David. And the greatest of all men was Moshe Rabbeinu. I don't know, maybe this is heretical, but I would choose a different list. I would drop all of those individuals, and I have 4 other individuals to put on the list. Binyamin, the son of Yaakov. Kilav, the son of David. Amram, the father of Moshe. And Yishai, the father of David. So you say, where do these people come from? I never even heard of Kilav, right? Who's Kilav? But the Gemara says in Bava Basra, 4 people died by the bite of the snake, which means there are 4 individuals who never sinned. And the only reason they died is because God decreed on all mankind that they should die because Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas. Who are the 4 people who never sinned? Says the Gemara, Binyamin, the son of Yaakov, Amram, the father of Moshe, Yishai, the father of David, Kilav, the son of David. Okay? So if one was composing a list of the 4 greatest people who ever lived, wouldn't you select the 4 people who never sinned? I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as he was, Hema Mei Meriva, he sinned at Mei Meriva. Moshe Rabbeinu sinned. Avram Avinu, he sinned. Yaakov Avinu, Vayikra Yaakov Ma'od Vayitzalai. The Gemara criticizes him for that. So if we were composing a list of the greatest men who ever lived, wouldn't we, I would put these 4 people, the 4 people who never sinned. And yet, Kilav is not one of the people on God's Kisei HaKavod. Amram is not there, Yishai is not there, Binyamin is not there. Why not? Isn't the mark of greatness someone who never sins? Isn't that the greatest barometer of somebody's greatness? Okay, so these are 4 questions that we're going to have to deal with. Number 1, if, according to the drasha, Ushmartem es hamatzos means guard mitzvos, make sure the mitzvah does not ferment, do it right away, what does that got to do with the fact that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim on that day? And let's say He would have taken us out a different day, then we wouldn't have to do mitzvos with zrizos. Number 2, we want to know why the Matzos Yesharim says when one has the opportunity to do a mitzvah, there is no greater danger. What do you mean? When you have the opportunity to do an avera. Why in this week's Parsha does the Torah say Asher Nasi Yechta, almost as if it's a foregone conclusion that a Nasi will sin? And number 4, which is a very fundamental question, is why are these 4 individuals who have never sinned not considered the 4 greatest individuals who have ever lived? Okay? That is segment number 1 on the Shiur. Put it in your back pocket. We're ready to move on to a little lumdus. Okay? We don't do this that often, but once in a while it's important to get involved in a lumdusha topic. Now, what does the word lumdus mean? You hear that in yeshiva, right? The guys from yeshiva, they say, there's a lumdusha sugya, not a lumdusha sugya. What is a lumdus? Lumdus is like this. The Sma in Choshen Mishpat makes the following statement, and he doesn't mean this in a derogatory way at all. Now, people misquote it, and the Sma says the following: Piskei balabatim hepach mi piskei haTorah. People like to say das balabatim hepach mi das Torah. Nobody says that. Piskei balabatim hepach mi das Torah. What does this Sma mean? This is not a derogatory statement. This is a challenging statement. The statement means the following: what we think intuitively is not necessarily the truth. Just because we have a certain gut feeling about something, or we think a certain way, or we think a certain concept is logical, by the Torah standards, it might be that the exact opposite is logical. In other words, the way our minds work is not necessarily the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is the way the Torah's mind works. And the Torah's mind is the way the Gemara thinks. The logic of the Gemara. The logic of the Gemara, that is the true, absolute, true thought process. That's what it means. Piskei balabatim hepach midas Torah. The way we naturally see things is not necessarily the way they are. Okay? So sometimes we have to apply and adapt the reasoning of the Gemara to be able to really understand things in the correct way. Okay. You shecht an animal. Before you eat the animal, is there anything you have to do? Yeah. You got to check the lungs. Why do you have to check the lungs? The lungs may have what we call sircha, a mum, imperfection in the mum, in the lung, which would render the animal a treifa. Eating an animal that has a fatal wound in the lung is like eating a pig. There's no difference. One is right, it's a treifa. Okay, you shecht an animal. Do you have to check the liver of the animal, the brain of the animal, the kidneys of the animal? No. Why not? Isn't it possible that there's a treifa in the kidneys or in the brain or in the liver? It's possible. But you don't have to be choshesh. You don't have to suspect. It's miut she'enoi matzai. It is a highly unlikely probability that there's any problem. And you could rely on the fact, you could rely on chazaka. You could assume the animal is kosher. When it comes to the lungs, it's very, very likely there's a problem. They have to be checked. When it comes to the other organs, you could assume they're good. asks the Mishkanos Yaakov the following question. How often do you have to check a mezuzah? Twice every 7 years. You have to check a mezuzah twice every 7 years. Why? What are you worried about? You're worried a letter is going to get rubbed out? Well, you think that's going to happen? It can happen. But is it likely to happen?
It's in a warm house.
It's very unlikely to happen. It's miyot she'enoi matzoi. It is a highly improbable likelihood. So asks the Mishkanos Yaakov, if one is required to check a mezuzah for a psul, for something which would render the mezuzah invalid, why is one not obligated to check all the parts of an animal for a treifa, for a mum? What's the difference? If you have to check your mezuzah, why don't you have to check your animal? That is the question of the Shailas Uchuvas Mishkanos Yaakov. Okay, got it? That's Lamda Shakasha number 1. Okay? Fine. Question number 2. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Nida, you have a garment, you sewed a wonderful garment, and one stitch of linen got mixed into that garment. It's a wool garment. One stitch of linen got mixed into that garment. You don't know where. You looked under the magnifying glass and under the microscope. You can't find it, but it's there somewhere. What could you do with this garment? Says the Gemara, don't sell it to a guy. Normally, if you have something which is absolute shatnez, you could sell it to a guy. A guy is allowed to wear shatnez, right? You get a Yugo Boss suit, right? And it's full of shatnez. You give it to a guy, he could wear it. Shatnez is not asr bahana. A guy is allowed to wear the suit. But if the suit has shatnez and you can't identify where, you can't give it to a guy, because maybe the guy will wear it, and then when he's finished with it, he'll give it to a Jew. So you can't sell it to a guy.
And if you're going to know, but the guy is going to tell the Jew that
Right.
the shatnez?
Yeah, if it has a label in it, it says this suit has shatnez in it, so then you can give it to a guy and okay, fine. However, what can you do? What can you do with the shatnez? You could bury someone in shatnez. You could bury someone. I mean, what is the guy? The guy's dead. La meisim chavshi. People who are dead are not obligated in mitzvos. And therefore, put it on a dead guy, it's not a problem. That's what the Gemara says. Okay? The Gemara Nida Samachal Amad Beis. The problem is, the Gemara says in Brachos on Daf Yud Ches, that if you go into a cemetery, a Beis HaKvaros, you're not allowed to go into a Beis HaKvaros wearing tefillin. You're not allowed to go into a Beis HaKvaros holding a Sefer Torah or learning from a Sefer Torah. Why? Says the pasuk in Mishlei, Loyeg larash chirei faisehu. You're mocking the poor. Right, if you go into the cemetery holding the Sefer Torah or wearing the tefillin, right? It's imagine. Okay, we'll get to the tzitzis. Right? Imagine you go on Main Street. There's a poor guy there. You open up your wallet and you start flashing $100 bills and you walk away. You're mocking the guy, right? And it's cruel. Right? You guy, he can't even buy a soda, and you're flashing $100 bills in front of him. So to walk by a dead person, wearing your talis, wearing your tefillin, holding your Sefer Torah, you're mocking the poor. Says the Gemara further. The Gemara says, Reb Chia and Reb Yonasan were wearing their tchelas in the Beis HaKvaros, and the tzitzis of Reb Yonasan were dragging in the Beis HaKvaros, and Reb Chia says, what are you doing? These people who are in their grave, they're saying, look at these guys. Tomorrow, they're going to be with us in the ground. And now they're mocking us. What a chutzpah. So you have your tzitzis, you got to stick them into your, right? You got to make sure they're not sticking out. Okay? Why? Because you don't want to mock the poor. You can't mock the dead. Loyeg, larash, chireif, oisehu. So what's the obvious question?
So how you put in tachlikim?
So Gabi must have had some good sushi tonight, right?
Good sauce.
It's a steering Gemara. The Gemara Nida says that you're allowed to put what? Shatnez on a mace. What about the fact you're mocking the mace? Aren't you mocking the mace? Look, you're dead, so you're allowed to wear shatnez. So apparently the Gemara feels that once the guy's in the ground, he has better things to worry about than whether we're mocking him with mitzvos or not. So the Gemara has no problem with putting shatnez on a mace. Why does the Gemara have a problem wearing your tefillin, wearing your talis, with your strings flying out in the Beis HaKvaros? Are we worried about loyeg larash, or are we not worried about loyeg larash? This is the question of Tosfos. Tosfos tries to give an answer by saying that tzitzis are specifically problematic because tzitzis are compared to the whole Torah, learning Torah is compared to the whole Torah, tefillin is compared to the whole Torah, but isolated averos is not a problem. Okay, but we are going to give a different answer other than Tosfos. Again, the question number 2.
It's not a problem, but in general it's a problem.
Correct, that's what Tosfos says. But we're going to be giving a different answer tonight, okay? So Lamdisha question number 2 is, if the Gemara tells us in Masechta Nida that it is not problematic to put shatnez on a mace, why then is it problematic to wear tefillin, to learn Torah in the Beis HaKvaros? Okay. And finally, question number 3. Shmura matzah. Do you need to eat shmura matzah the whole Pesach?
No.
No. No. When do you have to eat shmura matzah? The first night of Pesach. The first 2 nights. Could somebody tell me what is the difference between regular matzah and shmura matzah, other than $20 a pound? What's the difference between regular matzah and shmura matzah? What's shmura matzah? You're guarding the matzah from the time it's cut, that it doesn't become chametz. Question, are you allowed to eat chametz on the 3rd day of Pesach? No. Are you allowed to eat chametz on the 4th day of Pesach?
No.
Are you allowed to eat chametz on the 7th day of Pesach? No. So could somebody tell me, if the reason why we have shmura matzah is to make sure the matzah is not chametz, why in the world do we only have to have shmura matzah on the first night of Pesach and not the rest of Pesach? I understand the first night of Pesach, we have a mitzvah to eat matzah. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? The reason we have shmura matzah is we have to guard it to make sure it's not chametz. So either we have to guard it or we don't have to guard it. But it's not more lenient to eat chametz on the 7th day of Pesach than it is on the first night of Pesach. So if we're worried, if we're really worried, maybe this matzah has turned chametz, then we should be required to eat shmura matzah the entire Pesach. And if we're not worried, then what do you have to eat shmura matzah the first night for?
It's not. The thing is, we have to eat matzah the first night of Pesach.
Okay.
That's the only time. The rest of the Pesach, you don't have to eat matzah at all. You don't have to.
But you're not allowed to eat chametz.
No.
So if you're not allowed to eat chametz, and shmura matzah is making sure it doesn't become chametz, so then you should always have to eat. Meaning this, what's the concept of shmura? You really want to make sure 100% that it's not chametz. Well, then you're never allowed to eat chametz.
Just Hebrew, right?
No, a hiddur in what? In chametz?
That's not chametz. It's shmura. That's her name. Shmura. Matzah shmura.
But what is it a hiddur in? You're making more sure that it's not.
The finest.
Okay, if shmura matzah was, it's a hiddur in the mitzvah of matzah, I would understand why there's more of an inyan to have shmura matzah the first night. It's not a hiddur in the mitzvah of matzah. It's a hiddur in the prohibition of chametz. In other words, by having shmura matzah, instead of being 99% sure that it's not chametz, now you're 100% sure. Well, do you have to be 100% sure? You don't have to be 100% sure. If you have to be 100% sure, the Torah says you can't eat chametz the whole Yom Tif. If you don't have to be 100% sure, then even the first night, non-shmura matzah should suffice. This is the question of Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, the Ar Sameach, the Meshech Chachma. Okay? 3 lamdisha questions. Question number 1. If you got to check your mezuzah, why don't you have to check an animal? Question number 2. If it's mocking the dead to wear tzitzis, why is it not mocking the dead to put shatnez on the dead?
I understand the first question. We always check an animal. If there's a hole, if it's...
No, we check the animal on the outside, or we just look it over, you know. We want to make sure it's a cow and not a pig, right? But there's no chiyuv b'dika, there's no requirement to check any other organ other than the lungs. Why not? The same way we're required to check a mezuzah, why are you not required to check? Okay. The answer is given by the Meshech Chachma, and he tells us a tremendous principle. I'll give you the mashal. The mashal is like this. The boy comes into yeshiva one day. The Rebbe says, "Where were you?" "I wasn't feeling well." "Okay, refuah shalema, feel better." The next day, "Where were you?" "My sister-in-law got married and I had to go to her." "Okay, very nice." The third day, "Where were you?" "You know, I was on the way, the car broke down, I couldn't get her." "Okay." So after a while, the Mashiach comes and he says, "Very nice, you're excused day 1, you're excused day 2, you're excused day 3, you have an excuse, but you're going to be an Am Haaretz with an excuse." In other words, just because a person is excused from something, he still hasn't done what he needs to do. In other words, let's say a person, he has a good excuse for not making money, right? The first day, he had an excuse for that, right? But with all the excuses in the world, the excuse is not going to fill up his bank account. He's still not going to have money in the bank. All the excuses in the world, you're excused. You're pater. You will not be punished. But it's a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity. Says the Meshech Chachma like this. Here you have somebody lying in the ground, Nebuch, he passed away. So you're not mocking him by putting shatnez on him. You know why? How are you mocking him? Oh, you're doing an avera. He's not doing an avera. He's pater. God's not going to punish him because he was wearing shatnez. There's nothing. What do you want him to do? Take it off? He can't take it off, right? The arms are not working as well as they used to. He can't take it off. So it's not mocking him. He's pater. But if you're going to wear tefillin, you're going to learn Torah, you're mocking him. What do you mean you're mocking him? He's excused for not learning Torah. He's excused for not wearing tefillin. Of course he's excused. But he's not able to gain the great achievement of learning Torah and putting on tefillin. With all the excuses in the world, Hashem's not going to punish him for not learning Torah. Hashem's not going to punish him for not wearing the tefillin. But he's still not wearing the tefillin. He's still not learning the Torah. It's a lost opportunity. There's a fundamental difference between not violating an avera, right? There's a fundamental difference between violating an avera be'ones and not performing a mitzvah be'ones, right? If somebody goes, chas v'shalom, somebody puts a gun to someone's head, he says, eat the pig. So the guy goes up to Shemayim, what's going to happen to him? Nothing. What's he supposed to do? He was an ones, he has an excuse. But if somebody goes, don't put on the tefillin, he goes up to Shemayim, is he going to be punished for not putting on the tefillin? No. But he can't be rewarded for putting on tefillin. He lost out on that reward. In other words, excuses only help to a point. They only help that you're not liable, but you still have not achieved what needs to be achieved. In other words, there's a fundamental difference between positive action and guarding yourself from negative. Says the Meshech Chachma. Do you have to check your animal if there's a hole in the liver? No. Do you have to check your animal if there's a hole in the moach and the brain? No. But what do you mean? What if you eat the animal and it turns out there was a hole in the brain? So you know what's going to happen? Hashem's going to say, why did you eat this animal that wasn't kosher? Say, what do you want from me? There was no reason for me to suspect there's any problem over here. And therefore we're not required to check the animal. Because worse comes to worse, there's a problem, so what? Right? God's not looking to bust our chops, right? That's a little bit of a loose translation, right? Right? The Torah wasn't given to angels. We did our best. We did our best. We ate it. We didn't know any better. Not a problem. You're off the hook. But what's going to happen? You go up to Shemayim, and it turns out your mezuzah was puzzle. So Hashem's going to say, why didn't you have a kosher mezuzah? So you say, what do you want? You think I would have suspected that over the course of time one of the letters would have gotten wiped out? So Hashem says, you're right. We're not going to punish you. So you say, okay, let me in, pay up. I want Gan Eden. Hashem said, no. What do you mean Gan Eden? You didn't have a mezuzah up. You're not going to be punished for not having the mezuzah, but the mezuzah still wasn't up. You're not going to be accountable. You're not liable. You're not going to incur anything. But it was a lost opportunity. In other words, says the Meshech Chachma, the fact that we're not obligated to take certain measures when it comes to avoiding sin does not mean we could take the same liberties when it comes to mitzvos. Because mitzvos have a much higher standard. Mitzvos, in order to fulfill them, they have to be absolutely fulfilled. So in other words, just because, you know why you don't have to check your animal? Because worse comes to worse, you ate an animal that turned out to be treif, you're not liable. But worse comes to worse, your mezuzah was no good, you're not liable. But you still cannot get the great reward and have the great achievement of having mezuzah. Okay, now this is how he answers the shmura matzah. Okay, ready for this? You know why you need shmura matzah on the first night of Pesach and not on any other night? The seventh day of Pesach, let's say. Do I have to have shmura matzah? No. But what's going to happen if la'achar me'av esem shana, go up to Shemayim, and Hashem says, why do you eat chametz on the seventh day of Pesach? You say, what do you want? It said on the box it was kosher. There's an OU. I could rely on that. I could rely on the OU. Hashem said, you're right. You should not have suspected there was anything there. You made sure there was a hechsher on it, and you cannot be punished for eating chametz because the likelihood of there being chametz is so unlikely you didn't have to suspect for it. And if even at the end of the day a person unknowingly ate chametz, he will not be held liable. So why can't I use regular matzah the first night of Pesach? Because Hashem's going to say, the first night of Pesach, why do you eat chametz? So you say, you know, I didn't know any better. So Hashem said, you're right. You didn't know any better. Nothing to suspect. So you're going to say, so Hashem, reward me for the mitzvah of matzah. Oh no. It's still not matzah. You're not going to be punished for eating chametz. You're not going to be punished. It's not your fault. You're an oines. Matzah. You don't have to worry about. You don't have to think about. You live life as it is. You don't have to be so makbid. You don't have to worry so much. You do your best. But when it comes to a mitzvah, you can't rely on the fact, status quo, it's probably good. When it comes to doing mitzvos, you need to take every measure possible to make sure you're performing the mitzvah. Because if you were not performing the mitzvah, you may be excused. But an excuse, like Rabbi Chaim Brisker would say, Nebuch, you have a guy, he never had the opportunity to learn Torah. He doesn't believe in Hashem. So he's an apikoros. Right? So we say, okay, right, what do we say? We say, he's a tinok shenishba, it's not his fault, he didn't know any better, we'll give him an aliyah, fine. But Reb Chaim Brisker added one point. He said, Nebuch an apikoros is oichet an apikoros, which means, poor guy, we feel terrible for him. It's not his fault. But he's still not an observant Jew. He still has not gained that achievement. In other words, the principle we're setting forth is that while valid excuses help for averos, they don't make the mitzvah accomplished. Okay? They don't make the mitzvah accomplished. Okay. So let us move on. In other words, yes, tzitzis in the Beis HaKvaros. It's very nice that the mace has an excuse for not wearing tzitzis, but you're still mocking him. You know why you're still mocking him? Because he does not have the grand opportunity to perform the mitzvah. Okay. Rabbeinu Yonah, back to Rabbeinu Yonah. We've been reading Rabbeinu Yonah a lot. Rabbeinu Yonah writes that there's a great error in the world, and the error is that many people think that what makes a person a good Jew, you avoid sin. You make sure you don't eat on Yom Kippur, you don't eat chametz, right? You don't speak lashon hara. Says Rabbeinu Yonah, that's not what it's about. Life is not just about not sinning. Life is about achievements. What positive achievements have you accomplished in this world? Okay? Now Rabbeinu Yonah quotes a chazal that many people are familiar with, but they're not familiar with the basic interpretation of Rabbeinu Yonah. Chazal tell us, Viter HaKadosh Baruch Hu al avodah zara, al gilui arayos, v'al shvichas damim. God is willing to overlook the three cardinal sins. Someone commits adultery, God will overlook it. Someone murders, God will overlook it. Someone kills, somebody worships idols, God will overlook it. But God will not overlook the sin of bittul Torah, of not learning. Wow, that's pretty frightening. So, Victor Miller, this is in the Sefer Or Olam, Volume 6. I actually heard him say this on a tape. What do you mean God will overlook murder? God will overlook idolatry? The Gemara says in Baba Kama, Kol ha'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu vatran hi, anyone who says God will overlook even the smallest sin. Right? If someone forgets to make a bracha achrona, God doesn't overlook it. We believe nothing is overlooked. So how could Chazal say God is going to overlook the three cardinal sins? Anyone who says God overlooks, Yevatru Ma'ohi, God will overlook their life. How could we say God will overlook these three cardinal sins? Says Rabbi Victor Miller, that's not what it means. You know what it means? Here you have a guy, he sinned. Is it terrible? Yeah. But you know what? He can do tshuva. Say a person did the worst aveira in the world. Yeah. A person's bowed down to idols. Is that bad? Of course it's bad. But Is it the greatest sakana in the world? No. You know why? Because he bowed down to idols. So he'll do tshuva. Yeah, but what if he doesn't do tshuva? Doesn't do tshuva? Worst comes to worst, he'll just have to go to Gehenna and burn in the fire. But eventually he'll come out, and then he'll go to Gan Eden. So nothing is irreparable. God is able to overlook even the worst sin, eventually. But if somebody had the opportunity to do a mitzvah, and they didn't do the mitzvah, how could God overlook that? At the end of the day, we won't hold you accountable, but you still did not do the mitzvah. The mitzvah is lost forever.
Even deeper than that. What does it mean bitul Torah? It's not that.
Bitul Torah, you had the opportunity and you didn't take advantage. You had the opportunity. Okay, says Rav Miller. What is life about? Life is not just about not sinning, right? He gives the following mashal. A guy goes on vacation. He goes to California on vacation. You say, "What do you do on vacation?" So the guy said, "Vacation was amazing. I went to Cal." What did you do there? Well, first I got there, and when I was driving in my car, I didn't get any speeding tickets. And then when I parked, the cop didn't stop me for going through the double yellow line. And then when I didn't put the quarter in the meter, I didn't get a ticket for expired meter. And then I didn't get a ticket even though I parked on alternate side. And then when I was there, I didn't. So yeah, but Shaita Shabbalam, you fool, what did you do there? Did you go to Disneyland? Did you saw SeaWorld? You went to San Francisco? What did you do? Yeah, and I didn't get any moving violations, and the cops didn't pull me. Yeah, but what did you accomplish? Said Rav Miller, this is a little bit of an oversimplified version of it, because avoiding sin is also a great achievement, but this is an oversimplified version of it. Somebody who goes through this world without achievement, without positive achievement, they haven't really fulfilled their tachlis, their goal. In other words, Binyamin, the son of Yaakov, he was a great man. He never even sinned. The father of David, Yishai, he was great, tremendous. Greater than us, one of the greatest people who ever lived. David's son, Kilav, amazing, he never sinned, right? Amram, the father of Moshe, tremendous. But Amram was not as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. What do you mean? But Moshe sinned and Amram never sinned. That's not what it's all about. It's not only about avoiding sin. The main barometer of greatness is positive achievement. Now, don't think that if a person, that doesn't mean, I'm going to go do a mitzvah, even though it involves averos on the way. No, we don't do that. If a person knows that being involved in certain mitzvahs will definitely bring to sin, so he can't be involved in it. Doesn't matter how important positive achievement is. But what we're saying is, there are certain types of initiatives and goals that a person should aspire to and try to accomplish, even though doing so might put a person in a tenuous situation. In other words, you have a guy, he could sit in his room all day and say Tehillim. Somebody else who may go out and try to, let's say, be Makarev Rechokim, bring people closer to the Torah. Yeah, that's fraught with a lot of danger, You're out in the streets and you're talking to people, and in your conversations it might come to Lashon Hara. So does that mean don't get involved? No, it doesn't mean don't get involved, right? Positive achievement is the barometer of greatness. But nevertheless, if it's fraught with absolute danger, so you got to avoid it. But a person can say, well, maybe it's better for me just to avoid sin my whole life. No, that's not the goal. The goal is not Binyamin ben Yaakov, Yishai Avi David, Kilav ben David. The goal is Moshe, Abraham, Yitzchak, positive achievement. Avraham Avinu, he's the father of Klal Yisrael. He's trying to bring as many people as close to Torah as possible. Because of his love for Klal Yisrael, he came to sin by asking Hashem, in a way, Avraham Avinu was more prone to sin than anybody else because of his entire mahalach in life, his entire ambition in life. Moshe Rabbeinu, being the leader of the Jewish people, is a very tenuous situation. It could lead to sin. Says Rabbi Victor Miller, this is in a book that I bought yesterday, Kingdom of Priests, that I actually heard him say this. You know why the Torah says, Asher Nasi Yechta, that the Nasi sins? It doesn't say that by the whole community. It doesn't say that by an individual. Because being a leader of the people is fraught with great danger. Because of the great responsibility that rests on somebody of that caliber's shoulders, because of the various responsibilities that that type of person has, because of the various initiatives that that person is involved in, that's fraught with danger. Does that mean if a person has the opportunity, he shouldn't become the Nasi? He shouldn't take those initiatives? No. Life is about positive achievement. It's not, the barometer of greatness is not avoiding sin. The barometer of greatness is positive achievement. That's what Rabbeinu Yonah says. It's an error to think that the ikr loss for one's neshama is only violating sin. No. The main loss to one's neshama is if they're not involved in positive mitzvahs. Okay? Now, let me just reiterate, I don't mean to undermine in any way or to make loose doing an avera. Of course, a person has to do everything in the power of an avera, right? To the point where, just on the other extreme, we know we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. Why? Why don't we blow shofar on Shabbos? Because maybe someone will accidentally carry something 4 amos, the shofar 4 amos in the Shus HaRabim. Even if he does, it's misasek. And even though the likelihood of that happening is definitely miyah she'ein matzah. And what do we see? We're willing to forego the positive achievement because of this chashash, which should show us how careful we have to be avoiding avera. But conceptually, the barometer of greatness are not those who just avoid sin. Just avoid sin. Avoiding sin is the first step, almost. You can make the case, imagine you have a guy, he's a contractor, he goes around building everywhere, but all he builds are the foundations. Yeah, well, what did this guy ever build? He built a bunch of foundations. Right? What do you build? You build any houses, any mansions? No, he just builds foundations. Someone who's just careful not to sin, he's got the foundation, but he has no structure. He doesn't have the greatness. He doesn't have the achievement. Someone who's not careful to avoid sin and just does mitzvahs, so you can make the case, he has a great mansion, but with no foundation, the mansion will collapse. The avoiding sin is the basis that allows for the great achievement. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, David, Moshe were greater than these 4 individuals who never sinned. Says the Ksav Sofer. Back to the beginning. One more. Coming back to the Matzos Yesharim. Why does the Matzos Yesharim say that when you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah, there is no greater danger in the world? What about when you have the opportunity to do an avera? I heard from Victor Miller. You have the opportunity to do an avera? Why is it such a great danger? Worst comes to worst, you'll do the avera, so you do tshuva. And even if you don't do tshuva, you go to Gehenna. Now, Gehenna is not pleasant, right? It's not you don't want to be there. But it's not the greatest danger in the world. There's a way out. Yesh takana. Yesh tikva. There's hope. But you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah and you don't capitalize, there is no greater sakana. You know why? Because once you miss the opportunity, it's lost forever. Says the Mishnah in Brachos, Me'uvas she'eno yachal liskon. What is a mistake that can never be rectified? Someone who misses Zman Kriya Shema. Why? It's lost. Nothing you can do about it. Maybe you won't be punished, but you lost it. You lost it. Going back to the beginning. The Torah says, guard the mitzvos. Why? Because God took you out of Mitzrayim on that day. So yes, and let's say He would have taken you out the next day. What's the difference? Let's say He would take you. What's the Torah saying? Says the Ksav Sofer. When God took us out of Egypt, what would have happened had He waited 1 moment longer? We would have fallen to the 50th gate of Tumah, the point of no return. Had God waited 1 split second longer, we would have been lost forever. Our nation would have been lost forever. What should we learn from there, says Ksav Sofer? The value of what has to be done now. Capitalize now. Hashem says, guard the mitzvah. Do it immediately. You know why? Because I took you out on that day. And if I would have waited 1 split second more, you would have been lost forever. And you know what you should learn from there? Don't wait and let See what's going to happen. Because just like I had to take you out at that moment, and if I wouldn't have capitalized on that moment, the entire destiny of the Jewish people would have been lost. What do you mean? Just because of one moment? Says Iksav, yeah. That's the difference between this second and the next second. You never know what could happen in the next second. And it's based on that limud that we learn from the way God took us out of Mitzrayim. That's what we have to apply to all the mitzvahs. We'll read one last source. A letter from Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rav Shach writes that if somebody wants to gain Yirah Shamayim, he should read the Tshuvas of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, because just reading the way someone of Rabbi Akiva Eiger's caliber writes is enough to gain a degree of Yirah Shamayim. Look what Rabbi Akiva Eiger says. He says, number 19, Belel Pesach, the night of Pesach, Yisnahig v'kedusha u'v'yira, one should act with holiness, with fear, v'lismoach b'mitzvos, and rejoice in the mitzvos. And he tells us the mitzvah of Kiddush, the mitzvah of Matzah, the mitzvah of Morar, Arba Kosos, Hallel. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, just be very careful. You know, when you're measuring out that kazayas of Matzah, you know, some people, they have like that sheet that tells you the exact measurement of the kazayas. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, don't make it exact. Because if you're going to measure out exact, what's going to happen if you're missing a small amount? You're going to lose out on the mitzvah. So says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, make sure it's a little bit extra. Now look at the next paragraph. Amazing words. Uledaiti, in my mind, mi sheyesh lo moach b'karkada, someone who has a brain in their skull. Umamin b'Torah Hashem, and they believe in God's Torah. Eich lo yachas al nafsho, how can they not pity their soul? V'lo yehei misyare, and not be afraid. Shem mitzvah gedoyla kazu, that a great mitzvah like this, she'en lizakos ba ad yavar shana, that you will not have the opportunity to do for another year. Umi yodei yichya, who says you'll make it to next year? Yeh nifsed biyado, you may lose out on it. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, a mitzvah like matzah, that you could only, he says it's not like tefillin, that if you don't do it right today, you could do it tomorrow. A mitzvah like matzah, this is your opportunity. And if you don't do it now, who knows? Who knows if you'll be around next year? I mean, I feel that these words of Rabbi Akiva Eiger are dripping the words of the Mesilas Yesharim, Ein sakana kisakanasai. This is a man who obviously felt the great yira and the great fear and the awe. I better capitalize on this mitzvah now, because if I don't, who knows when I'll have that opportunity. The feeling of the Mesilas Yesharim, the ruach of the Mesilas Yesharim, the great meaning of these words, that the opportunity to do a mitzvah is the greatest danger, because if you don't capitalize, it's a lost opportunity, is dripping from the words of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, if one is not careful to do the mitzvah now, who knows, maybe they'll never have this mitzvah. And that's what the Torah is telling us. Ushmartem es hamatzos, guard the matzos al tikri matzos el mitzvos, because just like when Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, a split second made all the difference. That's the lesson. Ein sakana kisakanasa, ushmartem es hamitzvos, mitzvah habal yadcha al tach mitzanam. Have a good evening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.